Let's dive in here to the real significance of China's, quote, low-cost AI model, this DeepSeek R1. Is the sell-off across those names he mentioned deserved? Raymond James Tavis McCord is here to look at that for us today. VC Bradley Tusk on why it's going to be hard not to use DeepSeek. Cybersecurity CEO Ivan Sarini is back to talk about the hack and how DeepSeek got so good so quickly. And Deirdre Bosa, who was all over this story before everyone else. Welcome to all of you. Bradley, I just thought it was interesting what you said about people using this model. By the way, I tried finally to download it this morning and couldn't. Maybe that's because of the hack. But What's your experience been, and what do you think, the take-up ultimately will be here in the U.S. of this Chinese offering?
Yeah, I mean, look, as an early stage venture investor, there's no such thing as investing in a company that isn't either an AI company or using AI in some way, or at least has an extremely good reason if they're not. But if they're using AI in some way, then the cost obviously becomes very material and really important. And using OpenAI or any of these other companies is really, really expensive. And yes, I understand that DeepSeek is a Chinese company, but if any of my portfolio companies said, listen, we can build what we need at a fraction of the cost on an open source system, it's really hard as a fiduciary to tell them, no, you shouldn't do that. And so I think the problem isn't just that we have such a regulatory and trade problem. I mean, the problem is we got out innovated. This groupthink in the US where all of the companies approach this thing in the exact same way, and it really was all about sort of scale and cost. And, like Alex Mike from Scale AI has made some really good points about this, which is we should be a lot more aggressive in innovation. We've kind of lost the innovation war on this. And we should ask, why is it that no one in America thought to do this?
Well, I think people would probably say, hey, we're working on it. Like, that's the next phase of all of this. And there's a whole shift in here from kind of training to inferencing, which is an important part of the story and makes it interesting that Broadcom's down. But before we or maybe I should turn to Tavis to talk more about that. We saw 15, 20% declines in some of these exposed names. Do you think that's warranted given what we've learned here about what DeepSeek's new model can do? Or do you think this is overdone?
Well, if it's just DeepSeek, probably not. But I think the reality is what we're seeing is capitalism at work. And nobody knows exactly how AI is going to play out. But there's a lot of money that's gone into this space. And what that means is there's going to be a lot of innovation. And some of that innovation isn't necessarily going to be great for profits of certain companies. And so, when I see some of these names down 15, 20%, it just screams to me that there's very little conviction out there. So even though these names have been straight up for the last 2 years, people are buying charts, not businesses. And that's always a dangerous situation.
That said, it's not like they're selling indiscriminately. Meta's higher today, Apple's higher. Both of them are beneficiaries of lower cost inferencing models, right? Yeah. They are the ones who are kind of deploying this technology. If it's less expensive to make it, even if China got there first, we're going to get there eventually as well. So there is a logic, Tavis, to what the market is doing here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think in general, if you had to place a bet, is the real profit pool going to be on chips or models or applications that use those models? Like today, we're shifting over towards the application front. If AI is going to be a lot cheaper to deploy than most would have thought a couple months ago, that makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. Deirdre, let's talk for a second about kind of how they got here. And one of the big controversies has been, did they do it with these inferior NVIDIA chips, these H800? Which one's the better one? H100? So they did it with H800s. Let's just take it at face value because analysts say, look, it's possible that they did this and that the export controls force this level of innovation. So thank you, DeepSeek, for showing the rest of the world it's possible. The question now is, do we keep with the export ban on these leading edge chips or not? And in fact, David Sachs, what do we call them, the crypto, the AIs are, just weighed in on this on Twitter. He says, this shows that the AI race will be very competitive and that President Trump was right to rescind Biden's EO, which hamstrung American AI companies without asking whether China would do the same. It didn't. He says, I'm confident in the U.S., but we can't be complacent. There's a whole fight in here about open source AI models and whether we should be kind of going in the direction that OpenAI would prefer versus what DeepSeek and others are doing, kind of leaving this technology more open to the public. So how do you think policy-wise this is all going to play out?
Well, let's be clear. The export ban did not work. In fact, it backfired. It forced the Chinese to innovate in new ways that companies and giants here didn't have to. I call them the good chips and the dumbed down chips. The good ones are the H100s. That's the NVIDIA GPUs that everyone wants. NVIDIA 800s are the ones that the Chinese get because of the export ban. And what DeepSeek says it was able to do is create a model that outperforms some of our best models built here in America with those dumbed down chips. I mean, that is a point of debate. Some people say that the hedge fund of which DeepSeek was born out of had been sort of hoarding the better chips. But at the end of the day, Kelly, it doesn't really matter. We've moved on past that. We know now what DeepSeek proved is that these models and open source, nonetheless, I want to stress how important it is that DeepSeek's model is open source, can be built for a fraction of the price, whether that's $6 million or $60 million. That is far less than the hundreds of millions or the billions of dollars that OpenAI, Gemini, Google, and others have poured into this. So I think that's also maybe why you're seeing Meta in the positive today, because it's also working on open source metas. In fact, I can't remember who was one of the people we spoke to in the Valley on this, said that Meta is probably racing right now to figure out what DeepSeek did and build on top of it. And so there's a new race that started in open source development, which is really key there. And that's why the companies that were working on closed source models, like in OpenAI, real questions about their moat.
And Tavis, this all gets into this big pivot that's happening in the AI space, from the massive clusters that were required to train these models to the ones that can do more inferencing, maybe have a little bit lighter. That's why you're seeing the power stocks down. You know, yes, early last week it was all about Stargate, and it's going to have 1 million GPUs, and it's going to require, nuclear power. And now it's about, okay, and even if it were 5 to 6 million to kind of make the shift to inferencing, do you think that's enough for the likes of Broadcom, which should in a way benefit from that transition, to be down 18% today?
It seems extreme, but look, 3 weeks from now, we could be talking about something completely different. Innovation's happening really fast. It's really hard to predict in what ways it's going to happen and what company's going to benefit on a specific form of innovation. I think all we know is that, this market has thrown about $10 trillion of market cap into the AI theme. And it's going to be really volatile for some time. There's no set in stone way AI is going to get to market. And to think we know who the winners and losers are going to be at this point, or even to the degree they're public, is somewhat unknowable.
Yeah, there's a look at some of the biggest decliners, all in the energy space. Again, the people who we thought would need kind of the near-term amount of spend to support all of this. Maybe Sam Lessin, we talked to a few different people about this morning. He said $6 million in training has now destroyed $500 billion in meme-driven market cap. I don't know if it's fair to call it meme-driven, but in 2 business days. Roger McNamee said, look, it's obvious the Chinese approach is going to produce more value. It's not as wasteful. He says it exposes the ludicrous approach that American companies have taken to AI and calls the path unsustainable. Bradley, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think Deirdre got this right. If open source is here and it's what the market wants, and it's hard to see how that wouldn't be, we have to be able to adapt to that. So in part, that's what I think David Sachs was getting at in his tweet, which was, look, we're going to have to both move past the Biden executive order and possibly allow open source. And the American companies are going to have to adapt really quickly. But the other thing is, it always feels like human beings have this tendency to think whatever is right now is what will always be. And that's never the case, right? It's really not the case with AI. But I remember, coming on CNBC multiple times in the past year where everyone's just super excited about NVIDIA and nothing can ever stop them. And all of a sudden, $6 million just did. So I just really think it's important for people to be mindful here that we are in the early stages of something totally disruptive and transformative, and whatever you're doing, be prepared to pivot at any moment.
I was listening to one of the emergency podcasts from the weekend. It was one with Miles Brundage, Bradley, and he talked about how we shouldn't assume that just because these kind of inferencing models can be done with lighter compute that people don't still have a need for the chips. He likened it to creating Einstein and said, wouldn't you rather have 1,000 Einsteins than just one? I mean, wouldn't you rather even deploy multiple, types of this technology at the same time in order to get it, whether it's a homework problem or, a cybersecurity problem or whatever it is? So that's why I find this issue around NVIDIA. Okay, maybe in the very, very near term, you could call some of the financials into question, but I'm sure DeepSeek, I'm sure across China, I'm sure everybody would rather have access to more NVIDIA GPUs at this point than fewer.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But I think the problem is the disparity we're talking about is not $6 million versus $60 million. It's $6 million versus, $500 billion that Stargate was talking about, Trump the other day. The disparity is so massive.
It's not the whole number, though. 6 million was only the amount.
That was just the last piece.
But that's an important caveat. Yeah.
You're totally right. But overall, I just think that, Yes, but because because the cost of compute has been so expensive and the cost of energy for this has been so expensive that I think that just creates massive demand for something cheaper. But yeah, your point's right. Look, we don't, all we know is where we are today, and it's going to evolve in 20 different ways we can't even think of right now.
Deirdre, and final word.
Yeah. On this point, what I hear from people in tech is that you're not going to see any kind of slowdown from OpenAI or Google or Microsoft, the companies that want to build the best models in America, because now it's just all the more existential for them. I mean, what DeepSeek showed is you can get right to the frontier and build something on that and innovate. But if you actually make more advances in the pre-training model, which has become a lot harder to do, then the U.S. is back on top. So maybe that drive is even more urgent, let's say, and you do need to spend all that money, $500 billion, hundreds of millions in CapEx. Maybe you do need to do that just to keep the U.S. ahead. I mean, I think now it's more uncertain, but the stakes have risen.
I think that's exactly right. I appreciate you all joining us today. Bradley Tusk, Tavis McCord of Raymond James, our Deirdre Bosa, of course. And remember, you can watch Deirdre's full deep dive into DeepSeek and China's AI breakthrough by scanning that QR code on your screen or go to cnbc.com/TCTakes. We said she was all over it.